Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Wendy Block, and I'm Vice President of Business Advocacy and Member Engagement with the Michigan Chamber. And thank you all for joining us this morning to listen to our press conference and launch of the Listen to My Business Coalition, a new statewide coalition of businesses and employee advocates asking President Biden and the federal OSHA to reconsider the proposed federal vaccine mandate because employers cannot shoulder this responsibility alone. Joining us for this coalition launch are 7 chambers across our great state, including the Michigan Chamber. These include the Battle Creek Area Chamber of Commerce, the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce, the Lansing Regional Chamber of Commerce, the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance, the Petoskey Chamber, and Traverse Connect. We have a number of guest speakers today, and we will take press questions at the conclusion of their remarks. To ask a question of any of our panelists, we ask that you use the raise hand feature in this Zoom webinar. From there, John Selleck with Harbor Strategies will introduce you, unmute you, and ask if you are directing your question to a specific participant on our panel today. That is really it for our housekeeping this morning. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Rich Studley, President and CEO of the Michigan Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. Good morning. You may recall that last year, the state and local chambers here in Michigan announced the establishment of a Reopen Michigan Safely campaign. We worked together when state government was struggling to lift very burdensome requirements on Michigan's job providers. Here's one thing I've learned at over 40 years at the Michigan Chamber. When local chambers and state chambers work together, especially like we do here in Michigan, where the Chamber Federation is strong, we can be an effective voice for Michigan's job providers. The Chamber colleagues that are with us today represent thousands and thousands of businesses of different sizes and types all across Michigan. Why are we concerned about the pending federal standard? We're concerned for a number of reasons. One is that the Biden-Harris administration has circumvented the traditional rulemaking process for OSHA so that employees and employers across the country and in our state have not had the traditional opportunity to provide input on details and specifics. We expect that the federal standard may be announced later this week or next. That's why we're asking President Biden to reconsider. Why should he reconsider a one-size-fits-all, top-down federal government mandate on occupational safety and health? For the simple reason that not all states are alike. Michigan is different, substantially different than Maine or Missouri or Mississippi. Not all businesses are alike. Manufacturing is substantially different than construction. Construction is substantially different than retail. Retail is different than hospitality. Small businesses have different challenges than major corporations. I'm pleased to share with you today that we're launching together the Listen to My Business campaign to educate and inform the news media, the general public, employees and employers about the pending federal standard. We hope that our voice will be heard by members of Michigan's congressional delegation, and they will urge the president to reconsider. At a minimum, we hope that he'll revisit the traditional rulemaking process to allow Michigan workers and Michigan business owners to have meaningful input into a federal standard. We also want to highlight the critically important role Governor Whitmer will play. Under the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Act, Michigan is a state plan state. That means that we are required to have a state standard that is at least as effective as a federal standard. Many of our members are concerned that Michigan might go far beyond what is required at the federal level. So our message today is that living and working in Petoskey is different than living and working in Port Huron. Living and working in Grand Rapids is different than working in Grand Blanc. Living and working in Battle Creek is different than working in Bay City. And living and working in Traverse City is different than in Taylor. So the Chamber Federation is strong here in Michigan. It's our intent to play a positive and constructive role in this debate but it's time for the president to reconsider and slow down. And we hope that state government, especially the Whitmer administration, would take a deliberative and thoughtful approach and not exceed whatever the upcoming federal standard is. With that, Wendy, I'd like to turn it back to you.
Yes, thank you, Rich. Our next speaker is Nikki Devitt, President of the Petoskey Regional Chamber. Nikki?
Thank you very much, Wendy. Good morning. First and foremost, I think it's important that we say our members value the COVID-19 vaccines, and many have encouraged and still do so. Vaccination is the path back to normalcy. Federal vaccine mandate is well-intentioned, but unfortunately, it creates an entirely new level of private sector responsibilities. Our member businesses, by and large, have neither the experience or the resources to carry out at this time. From what we understand, it appears that members will suddenly have to administer a complicated program of required vaccination. That will include proving that their employees are vaccinated, the regular ability to provide shots on site, testing or tracking, and the testing of those employees who choose not to be vaccinated, and then running a compliance tracking system under threat of possible penalty for non-compliance. Under normal circumstances, taking on a mandate of this magnitude would be difficult, but we are still very far from normal today. And that is what we have to remember. Our labor market has already left our members struggling to recruit and retain the necessary number of workers to just complete core business functions. So many of our businesses have spent months reducing hours and operations in an effort to try and maintain the high level of service our region is known for. We are proud in our county to have an over 70% first shot in arm vaccination rate. We have worked hard with our members to educate and encourage vaccine as a safe path to recovery for our communities, and we will continue to do so. But when we look at simple math, we have to raise our concern. An employer that has 600 employees with a 70% vaccination rate will have 180 employees to test weekly. 180. How do they finance that? Calculate for productivity issues that they're going to lose if and when there are not enough tests available. How do they handle this with their HR departments and their staff when they're already so short-handed in the first place? Expecting businesses to have the human resources to operate such a detailed, intensive program under threat of penalty with the already limited staff and resources they have at a time of economic chaos simply is asking too much. Our businesses deserve the opportunity to share their input. With the emergency rules, the process, it provides no opportunity for input from the very people that are expected to carry out the tasks. This is why we are here today, and why the Petoskey Regional Chamber has joined Listen to My Business Coalition. We are asking President Biden to reconsider the path he's using. Just slow down, listen to us before forcing a federal mandate on our members. We not only want our communities safe from COVID, but we want our businesses to have every opportunity they can for a full economic recovery. Thank you. Back to you, Andy.
Thanks, Nikki. Up next is Andy Johnston. Andy is the Vice President of Government Affairs for the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, Wendy, and good morning, everyone. Like others on this call, while the Grand Rapids Chamber strongly supports vaccinations and businesses that choose to encourage them, it's very concerning to see that this OSHA rule is going to soon come down without comment or input from the very employers who are going to be charged with enforcing them. As Nikki and others have detailed, there's just a myriad of unanswered questions. In addition to some of those Nikki pointed out, how do you count 100 employees? That's somewhat of a complicated question. The fines could be as punitive as $14,000 per violation. Is that it? Or is that just the tip of the iceberg of what employers can expect? Can you work while you're waiting for a test? I don't know. And neither do our employers who are anticipating this mandate coming down. And along with these many unanswered questions, ultimately, this really puts job providers in an incredibly difficult position from both a political and just logistical position of trying to enforce this mandate when we actually see what the rules are of what this mandate will actually be. And, you know, many of us on this call also opposed a potential government mandate that would have banned employers from instituting vaccine mandates or mask mandates on their own. I think that's important to point out. We oppose both kinds of government mandates when it comes to this question. But back to this OSHA mandate, we surveyed our members when this was announced at the beginning of September. Strong concern, like Nikki and others have pointed out, you know, there's a fear of loss of employees due to this mandate. There's already an incredible amount of employee friction and changes happening in the economy. This is only gonna add to that. Another thing we saw from our survey is that our members are doing a ton already to encourage their employees to get vaccinated in a variety of different creative ways. That's the way it should be done. If this does go forward, if the president doesn't reconsider, we do ask that MIOSHA give a lot of leeway and time for this to be implemented correctly and with common sense enforcement. But that is another unanswered question, is how long will employers have to implement a mandate with all these burdens on top of it? So ultimately, Michigan employers, we value the health and safety of our employees and customers above everything else. We want to create safe workplaces, but we really believe that each employer should have the flexibility to make judgments about safety, how we attract workers, how we operate our businesses. Public policymakers should leave those decisions where they belong with private business owners. So the Grand Rapids Chamber is really happy to be a part of this Listen to My Business coalition so that we can make our employers' voices heard as this goes forward. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you, Andy. We have two more speakers. Up next is Kara Beer. She is the president of the Battle Creek Area Chamber of Commerce. Kara?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Again, this is a great opportunity for our chambers to come together and have our businesses heard. The voices of our businesses are what we listen to on a day-to-day basis. We want to make sure that we are putting this forward to all of you to really reconsider this federal mandate. We all on this call believe in American business and that our job creators are our heroes, that, you know, they've worked really hard over the last few years to make sure that they're overcoming barriers, but also encouraging their employees for vaccines, as they know it's one step closer to the economic recovery. This is something that we have worked hard and diligently with all of our members and our community to make sure that we are telling people vaccines are a great way of doing that, but we don't feel as though a federal mandate is appropriate. By placing the burden on our businesses to do so, to enforce and to penalize not only their businesses, but their employees with possible termination, it's unintended consequences in a time when we need our workforce and our talent to be there. These devastating consequences that could come from that would make that business either close or not survive. And when businesses thrive, our communities thrive. And that's good for everyone. For what's new and what's next, we're all in this together. We know that we need to work together and have our voices be heard. That is really what we are talking about today. Everyone who has been on this call right now has really reiterated what their businesses are looking at. We have a number of businesses in our area that are under that are at that 100 mark, maybe 102 employees, and now they are falling into that federal mandate of making sure they do that. How does that work? How long is this mandate going to take? Is it going to be a forever mandate that's going to be on businesses? Or is this something that will go 6 months from now, it will go away? These are all questions that we are getting from our members, and they're really trying to figure out how am I going to put one more hat on somebody in my business that I'm already short-staffed to figure out how to do these mandates. So we at the Battle Creek Area Chamber of Commerce are proud to be part of this Listen to Michigan Businesses Coalition. This is important for our members so that they can better understand. And then our role will then be able to tell our members what that resource is and how to help best navigate through this process. So thank you for letting us be a part of this. And I hope that you guys can help us reach our message out to the communities.
Great, thanks, Kara. Last but not least is Warren Call. He is the president and CEO of Traverse Connect. Warren?
Thank you, Wendy. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. As has been stated, we know that vaccines save lives and widespread vaccination is our best bet for a strong economic recovery. But the key thing is that the burden of ensuring a healthy and robust environment post-pandemic is everyone's responsibility. Employers should not be asked to shoulder this responsibility alone. It's important to note that in rural areas of Michigan, and indeed rural areas across the country, most businesses are small. The arbitrary 100-employee threshold means that in small towns, this mandate may put a considerable strain on just a small handful of employers to carry the full burden for what is most likely a very challenging set of legal and logistical requirements, as Andy and Nikki have already documented. Recovery from the pandemic and vaccine adoption are nationwide and also community deep issues. Full recovery demands a collaborative and shared approach from not just employers, but health officials, elected leaders from both parties, and especially individual responsibility from the general public. The Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance and Traverse Connect have joined this coalition because of the many, many concerns and uncertainties about this policy, and because it sets unrealistic expectations on our small businesses. It does so at a time when our businesses are both stretched to the max with staffing issues and also have been doing everything they can for the past 20 months to help our communities recover. To put it simply, we asked the president to reconsider this mandate. It is the right goal, but it's the wrong tactic to get there. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren. We're now going to turn things over to John Selleck at Harbor Strategies. John will facilitate questions. So if you do have questions, please submit them in the chat box and John will announce you.
We're going to hear from Beth LeBlanc from the Detroit News. Beth, if you could direct your question, you're ready to go.
Yeah, thank you for taking questions on this. I had a couple. One was, I noticed the Detroit Regional Chamber was not on this call. Were they invited to join, or do you know where they stand on this issue? And then my other question was, what is your understanding of what takes place after OSHA puts out these rules in terms of state implementation of them?
I could probably answer the MyOSHA question to kind of get us going. So as Rich had mentioned, Michigan has a state plan state, which means we have a state level OSHA program. It is our understanding that MyOSHA will have up to 30 days to implement this after the OSHA rule is implemented, so 30 days from the effective date. And the question though is whether or not they plan to take the full 30 days or they try to match the federal OSHA timelines. Still many questions about that and what their internal process will be. I know they are currently working to evaluate that.
Beth, other thoughts I would share with you is here at the Michigan Chamber, we have a substantial number of members in Detroit and Wayne County, Oakland and Macomb counties. But more to the point, as you know, we often work very closely with our friends at the Detroit Regional Chamber. We didn't think it would be helpful to you to have 10, 15, 20 local chambers on the call today, but we'll be reaching out to the Detroit Chamber as well as others. Today is just the rollout, and we expect the coalition, like the Reopen Michigan Safely Coalition, will grow, and that will have wide participation across the state because so many business people have the same questions.
Thank you very much, Beth. Next up, we're going to have Steve Carmody from Michigan Radio. Steve, go ahead with your question and please feel free to direct it to a particular person.
Okay. I guess I would be directing this towards Mr. Studley. Is the Michigan Chamber prepared to take this issue to court if the Biden administration pushes this through and the Whitmer administration tries to enact it?
First, we'll have to wait until the Biden-Harris administration announces the final rule. That's why asking today for the president to reconsider and asking today for the governor to go slow in any implementation. Our desire is to play a constructive role and still have a positive impact on the regulatory process. My understanding is that there are likely to be multiple legal challenges to the federal rule. Many of those challenges will be launched by trade and professional associations to address specific concern, the concern of manufacturers or the construction industry. We expect that several states may also challenge. So here at the Michigan Chamber, we know that it's better to try and help develop a good rule than have to go to court later. We will consider legal action at a later date. But as you know, legal action is difficult, time consuming, and very expensive. There's a quicker and better solution here, and it's for the president to reconsider and to go back to the traditional rulemaking process where employees and employers across the country, but especially here in Michigan, can provide helpful input.
Great. Thank you, Steve, for your question. Next up, we have Rachel Just from Sinclair. Rachel, please go ahead.
Thanks, John. I guess I don't have anyone directly to ask this to, but whoever could jump on and answer either of these questions. How many chambers are part of this? Have you kind of gotten a final number on that? Maybe I missed that earlier in the call. And then also I wanted to know who you've reached out to about this. So whether you've reached out to anyone with OSHA or the administration, and what the response has been so far.
So today is the launch of our statewide coalition. We have 7 chambers who have joined us for the launch. As Rich had mentioned, though, we plan fully to continue to grow the coalition to other local and regional chambers, as well as other statewide business associations who we know share our concerns. So this is somewhat similar to the launch we did on the Reopen Michigan Safely Coalition, where over time we grew to, I believe, over 50 different organizations, and we're hopeful that we will have a same sort of thing. In terms of the Biden administration, really, there was no outreach by the Biden administration to the business community before they made their announcement that they would be pursuing a vaccine mandate. We do continue to have a good dialogue with the Michigan OSHA about their timeline and their intentions, but this will be a federal floor as we understand it. So my OSHA will really only have a certain amount of wiggle room, and we will be encouraging them not to go stronger or harder on this mandate, but to be following that federal floor if their hand is forced in that regard, which we believe it will. So, you know, the Biden administration at this point has not shown willingness to listen to the business community's concerns. I'm sure you've seen as many or more of the media stories on this as we have from employers who tried to tackle this alone and do these vaccine mandates on their employees and have found that it's been very difficult just in terms of retaining quality workers.
Rachel, I would also share with you that last week we learned from the U.S. Chamber and other organizations at the national level that it seemed like the White House had picked up the pace on decision making. So we thought it was most timely and appropriate at the beginning of this week to ask the president to please reconsider and to start educating and informing state officials about our concern regarding the role of Michigan as a state plan state. I would also share with you that ideally we would have waited until later in the week. The Michigan Association of Chamber Professionals, representing over 100 local chambers across the state, will be meeting in just a couple of days, but we thought we would be remiss if we waited, and we'd rather be proactive than to respond to rules that have already been formed without employee and employer input. So we will be working to grow the coalition, and again, we anticipate widespread support. I might ask our friend Warren to talk a little bit about the Northern Chamber Alliance, and there are more chambers on the call than it might appear at first glance.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Just a note there. The Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance is a coalition member. And the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance represents 16 chamber and economic development organizations across Northern Michigan. So it is a broad group representing over 7,500 businesses. And to Rich's point, perhaps a broader group than may initially appear. But it is important again to reiterate that from a standpoint of Northern Michigan businesses, this would be a very, very difficult logistical hurdle to bear.
All right, thank you for that question. Next up, we're going to have Dave Eggert from the Associated Press. Go ahead, Dave.
Hi, thanks. This question is probably best for Wendy or Rich. Just wanted to follow up on Beth's question on Michigan being a state plan state. Is it your understanding that the governor has to at least hit that federal floor rule? It's not like she couldn't, I guess, go the other way on vaccine mandate.
Wendy, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, so Dave, I think, we're still awaiting many details about this proposed emergency temporary standard or rule, if you will. But so far, all indications is that this will be the federal floor, whatever is released, and that states like Michigan, who have a state-specific OSHA program, will need to follow, right? That they could only come in with an approach that is more stringent or more strict, not do something less. You have seen some state governors announce that they are going to instruct employers to not follow this or try to pass laws saying that we're going to have a mandate that says you can't follow the mandate. That's really putting employers in a precarious and difficult situation where on one hand you have federal law saying you must do this, and then on the other hand you have a state law that says no, you can't. We're not really looking for that sort of conflict, but we are asking the Biden administration to reconsider their proposed emergency temporary standard.
Dave, the magic words in the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Act is if you are a state plan state, if you have been delegated by the U.S. Department of Labor the authority to administer the federal program in your state, whatever state standards you develop must be at least as effective. And as Wendy indicated, the concern is there's a world of difference between at least as effective, tailored to implement the federal standard in your state. And sometimes there's been a tendency in the past that state officials look at a federal standard as a jumping off point to do more, to do differently, to enact substantially more stringent standards. And that would be our concern. I want to echo what Wendy said. Many of us are on regular calls with leaders at the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. And part of the challenge with the proposed federal rule is they can't tell you any more about the details than we can, which is kind of a remarkable situation for a state agency to be in. And we're hopeful that they will be thoughtful and deliberative, but they'll be under tremendous pressure to do nothing or to substantially exceed the federal standard. And we want to anticipate and participate in that debate.
All right, thank you, David. Next up, we have a question from Fox 17 in Grand Rapids. Please go ahead.
Hi there, this is Marisa, really at Fox 17. I have a quick question related to, do you guys have an idea as to how many businesses in Michigan would be impacted by this proposed mandate? And then I'm also curious, out of all of the members, that are a part of your organizations, do you guys have like a rough percentage as to how many are opposed to this for the reasons that you guys listed here?
Well, so there's over 100 million businesses, I believe. I saw this number. I think we could probably follow up with you. I think it's something in the range of 8 million. No, that's not right. I'm not sure about the number of businesses. I know I saw the statistic early on. In terms of the number of businesses that are doing outreach on this, it is coming fast and furious. Just a number of members that have voiced concerns about the impact that this could have on them and their ability to attract and retain quality workers, especially amongst the vaccine hesitant or vaccine reluctant populations. There's also a significant amount of concerns and questions about weekly testing, of course, because there's this alternative where if you don't want to get vaccinated, you can submit to weekly testing. But unfortunately, rapid tests are not available. Even if you wanted to buy them today, they're in scarce supply. And the testing infrastructure in many of our communities are not set up in a way that they're ready to take on this influx of workers who will need to submit to weekly testing. And so just a lot of logistical questions about how you might make that work, whether it be on-site or sending employees weekly to a testing facility. And we expect those questions only to increase and those concerns only to increase as more details become available. But we can circle back with you on the number of Michigan employers that would need to comply. I know that statistic is out there somewhere. I just don't have it.
But you raised a good point in your question of why 100, right? What's the magic number? Why are we doing 100? And I think that leads to questioning of what issue are we really trying to solve here with this? The number of employers above 100 nationwide is not as many as you would think, right? But it's still incredibly difficult to administer it, and it's going to create, the talent issues, supply chain issues. We're already starting to experience and only magnify those going forward.
But to Andy's point as well, in regards to those 100 employees, how do you define an employee? Is that, you have seasonal workers that are going to put you over that 100 employees. How does that work? Who's monitoring that? But also, there's just really no clear definition. And so for us to be able to help our businesses get through this, we really need answers to what this mandate is going to do. And really, how are we going to enforce it? That fine is very steep. So if you have 102 employees, you now fall into that category. A fine of up to $14,000 could be extremely detrimental to a small business of 100 employees. And that's per infraction. That's not just, okay, I've got my first one and I'm done. That's per infraction. And so really looking at how is that defined? What is that magic number, like Andy said, in regards to why 100, and go from there.
Especially if, as Kara pointed out, the 100 employee number is determined based on the number of part-time and seasonal employees plus the number of regular full-time employees. The scope could be much broader. Here in Michigan, MIOSHA applies to employers in both the public sector and the private sector. I can tell you that Michigan Chamber members employ over 1 million Michigan residents. In the public sector, you would be looking at a substantial impact. We have over 500 school districts in Michigan. Many of them would have well over 100 employees. State universities, all 15 have over 100 employees. Most counties have 100 employees or more. Many cities have 100 employees or more. And even the small business that thinks they might be exempt today, questions we're getting from them is, what if I'm a vendor and a supplier to a larger company that has several hundred employees? Will this federal mandate indirectly apply to me? Can I be allowed to deliver my product or service on a job site that is covered by the federal mandate and not have our employees covered? So earlier, it was clear that there's more questions than answers. And one of the laws we're worried about, frankly, is the law of unknown or unintended consequences.
Did you have a follow-up question?
I did. And this is not related to the previous one that I asked. I may have missed this, but do you guys have an idea as to when these rules may come down? I know it was announced a few weeks ago, but do you have any timeline as to when we could get a hold of these rules?
I can answer that. So the proposed emergency temporary standard has been sent to the White House for review. Each day, the Federal Registry kind of pushes out a list of things that they're expecting to come within the next 24 hours. This was not on it on Friday, and it was not on it today. So we don't really expect it today or tomorrow, but there could be a surprise here. It's our understanding, though, that they're hoping to move quickly on this, and it could be yet this week or early next week that a final rule is pushed out and available for review.
Looks like we have one more question. It's Lisa Bowers with ABC 10 in Marquette.
Thank you for entertaining my question. And I may have missed this, but and I know that the details are, for lack of a better word, not defined. Would there be a different reaction if number one, these were better defined, and number two, there were federal dollars tied to the logistics of this?
Warren, your thoughts, especially about the impact on Northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula? Or Nikki?
Well, certainly from the perspective of the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance, Lisa, I don't think the answer is yes to either one of those. I don't know that the logistics, even if we understood them and had some federal dollars to help support the logistics, it's still an issue of you're asking employers to shoulder the responsibility for the entire nation. And that's still a step too far in this scenario. So I would say no is my thoughts on that.
I would also say, Lisa, to kind of echo Warren's point too, that it's something, more details and more logistics and more funding would make sense to many of our businesses and give them some sense of relief. But one of the things we're hearing too is, as has been mentioned, why that 100 number? And if you have an employer who has 115, you have an employer who has 92, those numbers are going to start to switch, because those employers with 115 know that some of their staff will leave rather than be subjected to testing or be vaccinated because they refuse to do so. So you're going to start to see more of a shift. And in Northern Michigan, as we're tenuous as it is, that's really detrimental to our businesses. And one thing that we've had employers talk about that we've kind of danced around but haven't touched on is that there is so much that our employers are already bearing the burden of. Now you are going to have very clear delineation in your workforce of who is vaccinated and who is not, who decides not to vaccinate and who will, in such a way that so-and-so is going to have to go get tested every day and take paid time to do that. And how is that going to look that's offsite? And what kind of strife does that put into a business? So our business owners are looking at a myriad of reasons to be needing more information. So the two that you point out is just the start of it all. I think there's much more to it, and hence the time for businesses to be heard, and hence why this coalition was formed, is so that businesses have a voice. Employers have the ability to say, let's talk about how to get this done correctly. Because the bottom line is everybody wants us to be economically viable, and we want a safe and healthy community. And we know the way to do that. We know the path to do that. We just have to figure out how it works best.
In response to the question, I would also share as an example here at the Michigan Chamber. We have approximately 30 full-time employees. Now, we have encouraged but not mandated our employees to seriously consider taking safe and effective COVID vaccines. For several years now, each fall, again, we encourage but do not require any employee who would like to receive a flu shot, which is more commonplace and more widely accepted, to do so. But there's no one here at the Michigan Chamber who is qualified to give a flu shot. So we ask a nurse to come in and administer those shots. One of the questions we're receiving is, will employers actually be required to administer COVID vaccines? Most employers are not staffed or qualified to do that. Another question many of us have received is on the testing requirement. Will employers be required to administer the test? Where do you get the test? How much will they cost? What tests will be approved by the federal government as valid? And again, one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, what happens if an initial test tests positive? Is that employee quarantined or suspended? What happens if a second test proves that they don't have COVID? So again, the costs are substantial, and the unintended consequences are very real.
And I just, with the passing of Colin Powell and others, right, this is so dangerous still, right? We get that. We want to have safe workplaces, but as Rich is pointing out with these questions, are we testing vaccinated people as well? Like, what is the, end here for this rule going forward? Very concerning. And I don't think anybody needs to be reminded of how divisive this is. And we're, again, now going to be inserting employers right in the middle of that. again, in very arbitrary ways, it seems.
Okay, well, with that, we want to thank everybody for their time today. It was an excellent 45 minutes. For those who have asked, we're likely to have a recording of this Zoom online relatively shortly, and I'll send out a link to those who've asked, or send me an email if you need to know. And then be sure to know that we have a coalition website that is up now at ListentoMIBusiness.com, and there are Facebook and Twitter pages of the same name, so you can check out or direct people to those areas for more information.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.